The sound of my wife's hand connecting with my face echoed through Murphy's brewery like a gunshot. Every conversation in the place faded instantly, leaving only the hum of the beer coolers and the distant clatter of pool balls from the back room. "You disgust me, Caleb," Nina hissed, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing into my chest. "I'm only with you for the money. Everyone knows it." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stood there, my cheek stinging, watching the woman I'd been married to for 8 years transform into someone I barely recognized. The entire bar was staring at us now. Friends, neighbors, people I'd done business with for years. Nina's voice had carried to every corner of the place. "Well," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "I won't bother you anymore." I turned and walked toward the door, my boots clicking against the worn wooden floor. Behind me, I could hear Nina's friends Ashley and Melanie whispering frantically, their voices mixing with the low murmur of shocked conversations starting up again. "Caleb, wait!" Nina called out, but I was already pushing through the heavy oak door into the cool Maine evening. The parking lot gravel crunched under my feet as I made my way to my truck. My hands were shaking slightly as I fumbled for my keys, not from fear, from pure, undiluted fury. 8 years of marriage, and this is how it ends, with a public humiliation in front of half the town? I sat in my truck for a moment, staring back at the warm glow spilling from Murphy's windows. Through the glass, I could see Nina gesturing wildly to her friends, probably spinning some story about how I'd driven her to this moment, how I was the villain in her little drama. My phone buzzed. A text from my foreman, Ricky. "Saw what happened. You okay, boss?" I typed back, "Meet me at the house in 20 minutes. We need to talk." The drive home took me through the heart of our small Maine town, past the old mill that Nina had converted into her event planning venue, past the courthouse where we'd gotten our marriage license, past all the familiar landmarks of a life I thought I understood. Our house sat on 2 acres at the end of Maple Street, a sprawling colonial I'd bought and renovated myself back when Nina still pretended to love me. The detached garage housed my workshop and the home office for Monroe Packaging, the business I'd built from nothing over the past 15 years. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at the house. All the lights were off except for the porch light I'd left on. Nina was still back at Murphy's, probably holding court with her friends, playing the victim. Ricky's beat-up Ford pulled in behind me just as I was getting out of my truck. Rick Martinez had been my best friend since high school and my most trusted employee for the past decade. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it was him. "Jesus, Caleb," he said, climbing out of his truck. "What the hell happened back there?" "My wife decided to end our marriage in the most public way possible," I replied, unlocking the front door. "Come on in. I need to make some phone calls." We settled in my home office, a converted bedroom lined with filing cabinets and business awards. I pulled out my laptop and started typing, my fingers moving with mechanical precision. "What are you doing?" Ricky asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Damage control," I said without looking up. "First I'm freezing all our joint accounts, then I'm changing every password she has access to, business accounts, vendor portals, everything." "Isn't that a little extreme? Maybe she was just drunk and—" "Ricky." I looked up at him. This wasn't a drunk outburst. This was calculated. She wanted everyone to see it, to hear it. She's been planning this. As if to prove my point, my phone buzzed with a text notification. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't a message to me. It was a notification from Nina's phone, which was linked to our shared iCloud account. The message was from someone named Jay. "Can't wait for Friday night. The plan is working perfectly. Soon we'll have everything we need." I showed the screen to Ricky, whose eyes widened. "Who's Jay?" he asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I muttered, thinking of Jared Linton, the flashy real estate agent who'd been sniffing around Nina's events business lately. But I need proof. I spent the next hour systematically locking Nina out of everything: bank accounts, credit cards, business systems, even the Netflix password. If she wanted to play hardball, I was more than ready to play along. "You sure about this, boss?" Ricky asked as I finished up. "This is going to make her furious." "Good," I said, closing the laptop. "She made her choice tonight. Now she gets to live with the consequences." Just as Ricky was getting ready to leave, I noticed something through the front window. A car was parked at the end of our long driveway, its engine running but headlights off. "Rick," I said quietly. "Look." He peered through the blinds. "Someone's watching the house." We stood there for several minutes, but the car didn't move. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "I'm going to go have a chat with our visitor," I said. "I'm coming with you," Ricky replied. We walked down the driveway together, our footsteps crunching on the gravel. As we got closer, I could make out the shape of a silver BMW, Jared Linton's car, the same car I'd seen parked outside Nina's venue on several occasions when she claimed to be working late. When we were about 50 feet away, the BMW's engine revved and it sped off into the night, tires squealing on the asphalt. "Well," Ricky said, "I guess we know who Jay is." I stood there in the darkness, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. My wife was cheating on me with Jared Linton, and apparently they had some kind of plan in motion. A plan that involved humiliating me in public and taking everything. "Ricky," I said, turning back toward the house, "how do you feel about doing a little detective work?" He grinned. "I thought you'd never ask." The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, most of them from Nina. I deleted them all without reading them and headed downstairs to make coffee. My neighbor, Mrs. Penny Hartwell, was already working in her garden when I stepped onto my front porch with my mug. Penny was 78 years old and knew everything that happened within a 5-mile radius of Maple Street. If anyone had information about Nina and Jared's activities, it would be her. "Morning, Penny," I called out. She looked up from her roses and waved me over. "Caleb, dear, I heard about last night. I'm so sorry." News traveled fast in our town. "These things happen," I said with a shrug. "How are your roses looking this year?" "Oh, they're lovely. But speaking of things that happen..." She glanced around conspiratorially. "I've been meaning to mention something to you. That real estate fellow, the one with the fancy car, he's been coming around quite a bit when your truck isn't in the driveway." My grip tightened on my coffee mug. "Is that so?" "Last Tuesday, he was here for 3 hours. I only noticed because he parked right in front of my mailbox, and I was expecting a package from my granddaughter." 3 hours, I repeated. "And there was that night last week when he didn't leave until nearly midnight. I was up with my arthritis, you understand, and I saw him sneaking out through your back gate like some kind of cat burglar." I thanked Penny for the information and headed back inside, my mind racing. Nina and Jared had been using my own house for their affair. The disrespect was staggering. My phone rang. "Ricky." "Boss, you need to get down to the shop. We've got a situation." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the parking lot of Monroe Packaging, staring at my building's front windows. Someone had spray-painted "Wife Beater" across the glass in bright red letters. "Security cameras catch anything?" I asked. "Yeah," Ricky said, handing me a tablet. "Check this out." The footage showed a silver BMW pulling up at 3:47 a.m. Jared Linton got out, spray-painted my windows, and drove off. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. "Well, that's destruction of property," I said, saving the video file. "But two can play this game." I called my insurance company to report the vandalism, then spent the morning dealing with the cleanup. By noon, the windows were spotless again, and I had a plan. "Ricky," I said, "what do you know about Jared Linton's schedule?" Not much, but my cousin Maria cleans his office building. She might know something. Give her a call. I want to know where he parks, when he comes and goes, everything. While Ricky made his calls, I did some research of my own. Jared Linton had built his reputation on being the town's premier real estate agent, but a little digging revealed some interesting information. He'd been sued twice in the past 5 years for misrepresenting properties, and his business license had been suspended for 6 months in 2019 for unethical practices. This was a man who made his living by taking advantage of people. Now he was trying to take advantage of me. My phone buzzed with another text from Nina. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I texted back, "You made your position clear last night. We have nothing to discuss." The response came immediately. "You can't just freeze me out of everything. I have rights." "So did I typed back, "until you decided to humiliate me in front of the entire town." Ricky returned with intelligence from his cousin. Jared drove a leased BMW that he parked in the covered garage behind his office building. He usually arrived around 9 a.m. and left by 6 p.m., but on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he worked late, probably the nights he spent at my house with my wife. Maria also said he's been bragging to the other tenants about some big deal he's working on, Ricky added. Something about landing a fish that's going to set him up for life. I felt my jaw clench. Is that so? There's more. Apparently, he's been telling people he's going to be opening his own development company soon. Says he's got a silent partner with deep pockets. The pieces were falling into place. Nina and Jared weren't just having an affair. They were planning to use my money to fund his business expansion. The public humiliation at Murphy's was probably meant to make me look like the bad guy when Nina filed for divorce and demanded half of everything. "Well," I said, "I think it's time Mr. Linton learned that some fish bite back." That evening, Ricky and I drove to the grocery store and loaded up on supplies, plastic wrap, window markers, and a few other items that would come in handy for our first operation. Jared's BMW was parked in its usual spot in the covered garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The building security was minimal, just a keypad lock on the garage door that Ricky's cousin had given us the code to. We worked quickly and quietly. First, we wrapped the entire car in plastic wrap, making sure to cover every surface. Then, using washable window markers, we decorated the plastic with messages like cheater, homewrecker, and my personal favorite, honk if you've seen my wife. For the finishing touch, I placed 3 opened cans of tuna fish under the car, where they wouldn't be immediately visible, but would definitely make their presence known once the Maine sun hit them the next day. "Think he'll get the message?" Ricky asked as we packed up our supplies. "Oh, he'll get it," I said. "The question is what he'll do about it." We didn't have to wait long for an answer. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7:30 a.m. Nina's voice was shrill with rage. "What did you do to Jared's car?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said calmly. "I've been home all evening." "Don't lie to me, Caleb. This has your fingerprints all over it." "Metaphorically speaking, I hope. Because if you're accusing me of a crime, you'd better have proof." There was a long pause. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's not." I hung up and poured myself another cup of coffee. Through my kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Penny working in her garden again. She looked up and gave me a knowing smile. The game was just beginning. The annual Founders' Day festival was always the highlight of our town's social calendar, and this year was no exception. Main Street was lined with vendor booths, carnival games, and food trucks, while the old courthouse lawn hosted a small stage for local bands and speakers. I hadn't planned on attending, but Ricky convinced me that hiding at home would only make me look guilty of something. "Besides," he said, "you've got as much right to be there as anyone else." He was right, of course. I'd lived in this town my entire life, built a successful business here, employed dozens of local people. I wasn't about to let Nina and Jared drive me into hiding. The festival was in full swing when we arrived at noon. Children ran between the booths with cotton candy and balloons, while their parents browsed handmade crafts and local produce. The smell of fried dough and barbecue filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, a bluegrass band was tuning their instruments. It felt like any other year, except for the stares and whispered conversations that followed me through the crowd. Word of the Murphy's Brewery incident had spread, as I knew it would. In a town of 8,000 people, gossip was the primary form of entertainment. "Caleb!" a voice called out. I turned to see Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store, approaching with a beer in his hand. "How are you holding up, buddy?" "I'm fine, Tom. Thanks for asking." "Listen, what happened at Murphy's the other night? That was rough, but you handled it with class." I appreciated the support, even though I suspected my definition of class was about to change dramatically. We were making our way toward the dunking booth, an annual fundraiser for the volunteer fire department, when I spotted them. Nina and Jared were standing near the ring toss game, both dressed like they were attending a country club event rather than a small-town festival. Nina wore a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while Jared sported khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "I'm too important for this place." They were talking to Ashley and Melanie, Nina's usual entourage. But something was different about the dynamic. Ashley kept glancing around nervously, and Melanie looked uncomfortable. The conversation seemed tense. "Trouble in paradise?" Ricky murmured, following my gaze. Before I could respond, Nina looked up and saw me. Her face went pale, then flushed red with anger. She said something to Jared, who turned and gave me a smug smile that made my hands clench into fists. They started walking toward us. "Caleb," Nina said when they were close enough to speak without shouting, "we need to talk." "I thought we covered everything at Murphy's," I replied evenly. Jared stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a rooster. "Look, Monroe, this doesn't have to get ugly. Nina's made her choice. Be a man and accept it." I studied him for a moment. Jared Linton was about my height, but softer around the edges, the kind of man who'd never done a day of physical labor in his life. His hands were smooth and manicured, his hair perfectly styled with expensive product. "Be a man?" I repeated. That's interesting advice coming from someone who sneaks around in the dark, vandalizing other people's property. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." I pulled out my phone and showed him the security footage from my building. "Funny thing about cameras, Jared, they don't lie." His face went white. Nina grabbed his arm. "What is he talking about?" "It's nothing, baby. Just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I laughed. "Is that what we're calling felony vandalism now?" A crowd was starting to gather around us. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably recording the confrontation for social media. Perfect. "You want to play games?" Jared said, his voice rising. "Fine, let's play. Nina told me all about your little temper tantrums, how you've been controlling and manipulative throughout your marriage. Maybe it's time people knew the real Caleb Monroe." "Please," I said, "enlighten them." Jared launched into what was obviously a rehearsed speech about my alleged emotional abuse, my controlling behavior, my jealousy and possessiveness. It was a masterful performance, full of psychological buzzwords and crocodile tears from Nina. The crowd listened in fascination. This was better than cable television. When Jared finished his monologue, I waited a moment to let the silence build. Then I started clapping slowly. "That was beautiful," I said. "Really moving. You should consider a career in theater." I looked around at the crowd. Of course, it would be more convincing if it were true. "Everything I said is true," Jared insisted. "Really? Then you won't mind if I share some truth of my own?" I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "Like the fact that you've been having an affair with my wife for months, or that you've been using my house for your little rendezvous while I was at work." Nina's face went crimson. "Caleb, stop." Or maybe they'd like to know about your plan to take everything from me, as you put it in your text messages. Jared's eyes widened. He hadn't expected me to have access to their communications. That's right, I continued. I know all about your little scheme. The public humiliation, the divorce, the plan to use my money to fund your development company. Very clever, except for one small problem. What's that? Jared asked, his voice barely a whisper. I smiled. You picked the wrong fish. What happened next wasn't planned, but sometimes the universe provides perfect opportunities. A child's ball rolled between Jared's feet just as he was stepping backward. He stumbled, windmilled his arms trying to catch his balance, and fell backward into the dunking booth tank with a tremendous splash. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Jared surfaced, sputtering and humiliated, his perfect hair plastered to his skull and his polo shirt clinging to his soft belly. Oops, I said loudly. Looks like someone got dunked. Nina rushed to help Jared out of the tank, but the damage was done. The crowd was laughing and taking pictures, and I could already see people typing on their phones, probably posting the whole incident to Facebook. This isn't over, Monroe, Jared snarled as he climbed out of the tank, water streaming from his clothes. No, I agreed. It's not. As they walked away, Nina's friends Ashley and Melanie approached me. I braced myself for another confrontation, but Ashley surprised me. Caleb, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. I had no idea about what they were planning. What do you mean? Melanie glanced around nervously. Nina's been telling us stories about you for months, making you sound like a monster. We believed her because she's our friend, but after seeing this, she gestured toward the retreating figures of Nina and Jared. I don't think she's been telling us the truth about anything. She hasn't, I said simply. We're sorry, Ashley said. Really sorry. If there's anything we can do... I thought about it for a moment. Actually, there might be. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. You just made your last mistake. Jay. I showed it to Ricky, who was helping me clean up my workshop. Guy's got balls, I'll give him that, Ricky said. What are you going to do? I looked at the message again, then deleted it. I'm going to give him exactly what he's asking for. 3 days after the festival incident, I was working late in my office when I heard gravel crunching in my driveway. It was nearly midnight, and I wasn't expecting visitors. I turned off my desk lamp and moved to the window, peering through the blinds. Jared's silver BMW was parked near my garage, engine running. As I watched, he got out of the car and started walking around my property, shining a small flashlight into windows and trying door handles. I pulled out my phone and called Ricky. Get over here now, I said quietly. Our friend is back. On my way. I grabbed a larger flashlight from my desk drawer and slipped out the back door. Jared was so focused on trying to peer into my workshop windows that he didn't notice me approaching from behind. Looking for something? I asked. He spun around, nearly dropping his flashlight. In the harsh glare of our combined lights, his face looked pale and guilty. I thought I saw someone breaking into your garage. I was trying to help. How thoughtful, I said. Except my garage is locked, my security system is armed, and the only person skulking around my property is you. Ricky's truck pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across us. Jared looked around nervously, probably calculating his chances of making it back to his car. Don't even think about it, I said. We need to have a conversation. Ricky joined us, carrying a heavy-duty flashlight that could double as a club if necessary. What's the situation, boss? Mr. Linton here was just explaining why he's trespassing on my property at midnight. I wasn't trespassing, Jared said, his voice rising. I was trying to help. I saw someone. You saw someone, I interrupted, because you were looking for something. What was it, Jared? Documents? Cash? Something you could use against me in the divorce proceedings? His silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, stepping closer. "You're going to get in your fancy car and drive away, and you're never going to set foot on my property again, because if you do, I'll have you arrested for trespassing, breaking and entering, and stalking." "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Can't I?" I held up my phone. "Smile, Jared, you're on camera." I'd been recording since the moment I'd confronted him. His admission about seeing someone breaking in, while he was clearly the only person on my property, would play beautifully for a judge. "This is harassment," he said weakly. "No," Ricky said. "Harassment is what you've been doing to my boss. This is just a friendly conversation between neighbors." Jared looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to decide if he should escalate the situation. I could see the moment he realized he was outmatched. His shoulders sagged, and he started backing toward his car. "This isn't over," he said. "You keep saying that," I replied, "but you never seem to do anything about it." He got in his BMW and drove off, tires spinning on the gravel. Ricky and I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner. "Think he'll be back?" Ricky asked. "Oh, he'll be back," I said, "but next time, I'll be ready for him." The next evening, I was having dinner at Murphy's Brewery when Detective Frank Derry slid into the booth across from me. Frank and I had known each other since high school, and while we weren't close friends, we'd maintained a cordial relationship over the years. "Heard you had some excitement at your place last night," he said, signaling the waitress for a beer. "Word travels fast." "It does when someone calls in a suspicious vehicle report for your address." He leaned back in his seat. "Funny thing is, when the patrol unit responded, there was nobody there." "Huh. Imagine that." Frank's beer arrived, and he took a long sip before continuing. "Caleb, I'm going to give you some free advice. Whatever's going on between you and Nina and you and Jared Linton, you need to be smart about how you handle it." "I'm always smart, Frank." "Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're playing a dangerous game. Jared's been making noise around town about filing harassment charges against you." I felt my jaw tighten. "On what grounds?" "Says you've been stalking him, vandalizing his property, making threats." Frank held up a hand before I could protest. "I'm not saying I believe him, but if he files a complaint, I'll have to investigate." "Let him file," I said. "I've got security footage that shows him vandalizing my building and trespassing on my property. Let's see whose story holds up better in court." Frank nodded slowly. "Just remember, Caleb, the best revenge is living well. Don't let this situation turn you into someone you're not." After Frank left, I sat in the booth thinking about his words. He was right about one thing. I was playing a dangerous game. But Jared and Nina had started it, and I intended to finish it. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Nina's having a meltdown. Says you're trying to destroy her life." "Is that true?" I typed back, "I'm just defending myself." "She's scared, Caleb. Really scared. Maybe it's time to back off. Tell her she can end this anytime she wants. All she has to do is tell the truth about what she and Jared have been planning." There was a long pause before Ashley's response. "What if I told you that some of us are starting to have doubts about Nina's version of events?" Now we were getting somewhere. "What kind of doubts?" "The kind that make us wonder if we've been lied to about a lot of things." I paid my tab and headed home, my mind racing. If Nina's friends were starting to turn against her, it meant cracks were forming in her support system. And if there was one thing I'd learned in 15 years of business, it was that cracks always spread. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something different. The motion sensor light over my garage was broken, and there were fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt beside my driveway. Jared had been back. I walked around the property with my flashlight, looking for signs of what he'd been after. I found my answer at the workshop window, fresh scratches around the lock, as if someone had tried to pry it open. I pulled out my phone and called Frank Derry. "It's Caleb Monroe," I said when he answered. "I need to report an attempted break-in." The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for them calmly, poured myself a cup of coffee, and read through Nina's demands. She wanted half of everything: the house, the business, my retirement accounts, even my truck. Her lawyer had painted a picture of me as a controlling, emotionally abusive husband who had systematically isolated Nina from her friends and family. According to the filing, she was entitled to substantial alimony because she'd sacrificed her own career ambitions to support my business. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I called my lawyer, David Stern, and scheduled an emergency meeting. David had handled the legal work when I'd incorporated Monroe Packaging, and I trusted him to navigate the complexities of divorce law. "This is aggressive," David said, reviewing the papers in his downtown office. "She's going for everything, but some of these claims—" He shook his head. "Emotional abuse, isolation. Do you have any evidence to contradict these allegations?" "I might," I said, thinking of the text messages and my security footage. "How long do I have to respond?" 30 days. But Caleb, I have to ask, is any of this true, even partially?" I met his eyes. "David, in 8 years of marriage, I never raised my voice to Nina, never controlled her spending, never tried to isolate her from anyone. If anything, I was too accommodating. I gave her everything she wanted and asked for very little in return." He nodded. "Then we'll fight this. But it's going to get ugly." "It's already ugly." That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Ashley knocked on my front door, looking nervous and upset. "Can we talk?" she asked. I invited her into my living room and offered her coffee, which she declined. "Caleb, I need to tell you something," she said, perched on the edge of my couch. "About Nina and what's been going on. I'm listening. She's been lying to us, to me, to Melanie, to everyone. For months, she's been telling us stories about how terrible you are, how you control her money and isolate her from her friends. But none of it made sense when we really thought about it." "What do you mean?" "Like, she said you wouldn't let her have her own credit cards, but she was always buying expensive clothes and going to the spa. She said you monitored her phone calls, but she was constantly texting and talking to people. She said you were jealous and possessive, but you never seemed to care when she went out with us or worked late." I waited for her to continue. "And then there's Jared," Ashley said, her voice dropping. "She's been seeing him for months, Caleb. Since last spring, at least. They weren't even trying to hide it from us, just from you." "Did she tell you about their plans?" Ashley nodded miserably. "She said once the divorce went through, she and Jared were going to start a development company together. They were going to buy up properties around the lake and build luxury condos. She said you'd never see it coming because you were too trusting and naive." The pieces were falling into place. Nina and Jared's plan had been to paint me as an abusive husband, take half my assets in the divorce, and use that money to fund their business venture. The public humiliation at Murphy's Brewery had been designed to make me look unstable and dangerous. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because it's not right," Ashley said, tears forming in her eyes. "You're a good man, Caleb. You didn't deserve what she did to you at Murphy's, and you don't deserve what she's trying to do to you now." "What does Melanie think?" "She feels the same way. We both do. We're done enabling Nina's lies." After Ashley left, I sat in my living room thinking about everything she'd told me. Nina and Jared had been so confident in their plan that they'd shared the details with her friends. They'd assumed that Ashley and Melanie would blindly support Nina no matter what. They'd assumed wrong. I called Ricky and asked him to come over. When he arrived, I filled him in on the day's developments. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "We're going to give them exactly what they want," I said. "A chance to take everything from me." "Come again?" I smiled. "We're going to set a trap, Rick, and we're going to use their own greed as bait." The next morning, I called Nina's cell phone. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "What do you want, Caleb?" "I want to talk," I said. "Face to face, This whole situation has gotten out of hand. I'm not meeting with you alone, not after your threatening behavior. Fine. Bring Jared. Bring whoever you want. But we need to discuss the divorce terms before this gets even messier. There was a long pause. What did you have in mind? Neutral territory. The Riverside Motel on Route 2. Tomorrow night at 8. We'll get adjoining rooms and hash this out like adults. Why should I trust you? Because I'm tired of fighting, Nina. You've made it clear that our marriage is over. I just want to move on with my life, and I assume you want the same thing. Another pause. Fine, but I'm bringing Jared, and if you try anything, I won't, I said. I just want this to end. After I hung up, I called Ashley. I need a favor, I said. What kind of favor? The kind that involves a camera phone and perfect timing. The Riverside Motel was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find on the outskirts of a small Maine town, clean but dated, with rooms that rented by the hour or the week depending on your needs. I'd booked 2 adjoining rooms and arrived early to set up. Room 237 was where I'd meet with Nina and Jared. Room 235, connected by an unlocked door, was where Ashley and Melanie were waiting with their phones ready to record whatever happened next. At exactly 8 o'clock, Nina's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. She and Jared got out, both looking nervous but determined. Nina wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people made in a week, while Jared had opted for his usual polo shirt and khakis combination. They knocked on the door, and I let them in. "Caleb," Nina said stiffly. "Nina. Jared." I gestured to the small table by the window. "Please sit." They sat across from me, and I could see them exchanging glances. They thought they were walking into a negotiation where they held all the cards. "So," Jared said, leaning back in his chair, "I understand you want to discuss terms." "I do," I said. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I've come to a realization." "What's that?" Nina asked. "You're right. Our marriage has been over for a long time. I was just too stubborn to admit it." They both relaxed slightly. This wasn't what they'd expected. "I'm prepared to give you what you want," I continued. "The house, half the business, everything in the divorce filing. But I have one condition." "What condition?" Jared asked suspiciously. "I want the truth, all of it, about the affair, about your plans for my money, about the lies you've been telling people about me. I want you to admit what you've really been doing." Nina's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? The affair, the public humiliation, the divorce filing full of false accusations. You thought you could paint me as an abusive husband and walk away with half of everything I've built." "That's not," Nina started. "It's brilliant, really," I interrupted. "Destroy my reputation, take my money, and use it to fund Jared's development company. The perfect crime, except for one small problem." "What's that?" Jared asked, his voice barely a whisper. I smiled. "You got greedy." I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made of my conversation with Ashley. Her voice filled the room, detailing everything Nina had told her about their plans. Nina's face went white. "You can't use that. It's illegal to record people without their consent. Actually, in Maine, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Ashley consented when I asked her to help me get to the truth." "This doesn't prove anything," Jared said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Doesn't it?" I pulled out a folder full of documents. Bank records showing unusual cash withdrawals from our joint accounts. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between you and Nina. Security footage of you vandalizing my building and trespassing on my property. Credit card receipts from restaurants and hotels where you two have been meeting. I spread the documents across the table like playing cards. "And then there's this," I said, playing another recording on my phone. It was Nina's voice from the night at Murphy's brewery. "You disgust me, Caleb. I'm only with you for the money. Everyone knows it." I had several people record that little performance, I explained. "Funny thing about smartphones, Everyone's a documentary filmmaker these days. Nina was shaking now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. What do you want? I want you to tell the truth. Right here, right now. Admit what you've been doing, and I'll consider a reasonable settlement. Keep lying, and I'll fight this divorce with everything I've got. There was a long silence. Then Jared stood up abruptly. This is bullshit, he said. You can't blackmail us into… Sit down, I said quietly. Something in my voice made him freeze. For the first time since this whole thing started, he saw me clearly, not as the naive, trusting husband he could manipulate, but as the man who'd built a successful business from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him. He sat down. Nina, I said, turning back to my wife, I'm going to ask you one more time. What have you and Jared been planning? She looked at Jared, then back at me. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. We've been having an affair, she said. For 8 months. We were going to use the divorce settlement to start a development company together. And the abuse allegations? They're not true. You never abused me. I made it all up to make sure I got more money in the divorce. And the public humiliation at Murphy's? That was planned. We wanted to make you look unstable so people would believe my story about you being abusive. I nodded and turned off the recording app on my phone. Thank you for your honesty. What happens now? Jared asked. Now you both leave town, I said. Tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're not welcome here anymore. You can't make us leave, Jared protested. Can't I? I stood up and walked to the connecting door, pulling it open. Ashley and Melanie stepped into the room, both holding their phones. We got all of it, Ashley said. Every word. Nina stared at her friends in shock. You set me up. You set yourself up, Melanie replied. We just documented it. I looked at Jared, who was staring at the phones like they were loaded weapons. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to withdraw your divorce filing and agree to a simple no-fault divorce with no alimony and no division of assets. In exchange, I won't press charges for vandalism, trespassing, and fraud. I also won't release these recordings to the police, the local newspaper, or social media. And if we refuse? Nina asked. Then I'll destroy both of you, I said simply. Your reputation, your businesses, your future in this town, all of it. Gone. They looked at each other, and I could see the moment they realized they'd lost. Fine, Nina whispered. Fine, Jared echoed. Good. You have 24 hours to leave town. If I see either of you after tomorrow night, our agreement is void, and I release everything. They left without another word, and I stood at the window watching their car disappear into the night. Think they'll actually leave? Ashley asked. Oh, they'll leave, I said. They don't have a choice. The next evening, I was sitting on my front porch when Mrs. Penny walked over from her garden. I saw Nina loading up her car this afternoon, she said. Looked like she was moving out for good. Looks that way, I agreed. And that real estate fellow drove by about an hour ago with his car packed full of boxes, didn't even slow down. I nodded. Sometimes people realize it's time for a fresh start. Penny smiled. Sometimes they do. You know, Caleb, I always thought you were too good for that girl. You deserve better. Maybe I do, Penny. Maybe I do. As the sun set over our small Maine town, I sat on my porch thinking about everything that had happened. Nina and Jared were gone, their scheme exposed and their reputations in ruins. My friends knew the truth, my business was secure, and my life was my own again. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I walked into Murphy's brewery that night, but it was the ending I'd earned. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's winning so completely that your enemies have no choice but to disappear. I raised my beer to the empty street and smiled. Cheers to new beginnings, I said to no one in particular.